Thank you for joining us here at One Kingdom Worldwide as we share the greatest love story ever told in support of the God-led life. Welcome to Section 1, Essential Scriptural Context that has been lost down through the ages. In the previous episode, we described God in the Garden of Eden, telling Adam and Eve to have dominion over the whole earth, but not over people. That the Life book helps to explain how, over time, the military chain of command came into existence and is so universally utilized. And that much later the leaders of Israel told Samuel to tell God that they wanted a king. That they were tired of the time it took to come to agreement together through lengthy discussions, and that through a king they could more efficiently expedite decisions regarding the kingdom. Saying that they wanted a king, like the other nations surrounding them, was upsetting to God because he knew that that would forever cause them problems. But because we are allowed to choose, he did not tell them no, but let them have the foolishness of their desire to be controlled by men. Further, we described that later, Jesus, as his disciples were discussing amongst themselves who outranked whom, spoke against hierarchy, power, and the corrupt control strategies that authority brings, when he said to them, "It shall not be so among you." Clearly, the use of authority over people is out. Well, 15 to 20 years ago, Fortune 500 corporations began moving to leadership by collective wisdom instead of our centuries-old hierarchical authority models. It's God's way that we each contribute what we know and understand, and it works best because we aren't relying on the top dog boss to have to know everything. It further reduces the stress on leaders because they are no longer expected to make all of the decisions. It's quite a dangerous thing to put so much pressure on so few people. And the consultants to Fortune 500 businesses started this major trend away from authority-based management worldwide long ago. In 1988, Isaacson and Behrens wrote the book, Working Together, a personality-centered approach to management. 20 years ago, Ludeman and Erlandson wrote a book called The Alpha Male Syndrome, and in 2014, Pat Lencioni wrote a book called The Advantage. Sequentially, the books from these international Fortune 500 consultants have returned us to the successful biblical leadership model that is summarized in the New Testament. That is, that we are all individually important, uniquely gifted body parts in the body of Christ, in which Christ is the head, as we align our hearts with His to do all of the Father's will. Ludeman and Erlandson are also the co-developers of the Alpha Assessment, used by over 20,000 high-capacity leaders in 45 countries. While women tend to be put off by the Alpha Male Syndrome book title, the term is simply an animal kingdom analogy for passionate, high-capacity leaders of all genders. This most often brings to mind the image of the lion, the king of the jungle, but is just as true for female alphas everywhere. In their work, the authors show alphas how to leverage their unique strengths while confronting their destructive desire to control. To paraphrase, they describe the need for balanced, complementary, collective leadership by passion-aligned but diversely gifted individuals, and describe the inability of any CEO to survive long-term without such partnerships. As Lencioni describes in The Advantage, we need to have all of the information from all of the people if we hope to be unified in truly wise decisions together. When we retain our bias for hierarchical authority, we fail far more frequently because bosses cannot know all of the information on their own. Besides, hierarchical authority-based models keep people afraid to confront for fear of losing their job, their income, and their ability to house and feed their families. When we collectively commit to unity at all costs, in collective leadership, and in relational, mutual accountability, we win more consistently I've seen it time and time again. And the advantage helps us with how to best approach these conversations. In my experience, the best of leaders do not need to leverage, manage, manipulate, or maneuver. Leadership teams who operate without the premise of authority are so adept at drawing out all of the information from their team members that it is a uniting process whereby everyone is fully bought in to what they were a part of deciding. Authority and hierarchy produce a fear that blocks the sharing of important information. Authority is out. When we use authority, unity and the collective wisdom offered to us by God are not our number one priority. There are really only two ways of working: in unity or in assuming some level of authority over people. Knowing that the best of us will fail when using the world's hierarchical, authority-based operating system, leaders replace it with God's unity operating system. Submitting to God as the only authority, they constantly refer to a set of unity values that allow the safe input of all. The authoritarian model has winners and losers, but the unity operating system develops and sustains unity throughout as we collectively discern the mind of Christ as his Talmudim. Spirit-led, he turbocharges our efforts and scales them up collectively. So the question becomes, will we be safe? Will we be able to stay in the attitudes of Jesus? Will we be able to give people the right, the freedom to make their own choices? Will we allow people that are not in Jesus' attitudes and not producing fruit of the Spirit, who are not Talmudim, the grace, the mercy, as peacemakers, humble, desiring goodness, even though we must persevere to share the truth? Will we be able to gently confront those who are not living this out? Because most people in this world are not at all familiar with what I just shared with you. That being the case, you can't push your way in. You can share the information as God would share the information, as he did in the garden, as Jesus did in the New Testament, and hope for a good outcome. But if that outcome doesn't come, will you push? Will you press? Or will you maintain a relationship as Jesus did with the foolishness of the disciples that he had? I recall at one point he looked at them and said, "How long must I remain with you?" If you think about it, he'd been with them a few years and they were still making some of the foolish mistakes. So, recognize that we're just as pushy and pressuring as Peter, but we can be just as peaceful as the one Jesus loved, the Apostle John, a more balanced soul. Over time, find balance in your ability to speak the truth with the mind of Christ and a heart after the Father, producing good fruit. See you next time.